Hello, and welcome to Timing is Everything, a program of Care Dimensions. My name is Mary Crowe. I'm the Director of Professional and Community Education at Care Dimensions. And I'm so pleased today to have on the show Claire Willis, who is a clinical social worker, an ordained lay Buddhist chaplain, and an author. And today we're going to talk about creating a legacy from your everyday life. Claire, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And, and some of our audience might even remember you have been on our show before. You do such amazing work, and I'm just thrilled to have you back on the show. And we actually opening to grief when we talked about your wonderful book on opening to grief on that the first time, and that was I think a couple of years ago. And again, just so thrilled to have you back on, Claire.
Thank you so much.
So I'd love for you to tell the audience a bit about yourself.
Okay. So I'd like to start by telling you that most of the work I do is with people living with cancer, people who are facing the end of life and bereavement work. And I've worked primarily in group settings because I find that the privatization of pain is one of the things that creates suffering. So I like when people are together and people see that they are not alone. I came to this work in large part because a few years ago, many years ago, I had a life-threatening illness and I almost died. And I realized I really wanted to be talking with people about what was most essential, and that my own intensity had a home in this work. It didn't have such a good home in my family, but it had a good home in this work, and it was a place that was it was welcomed. So that's how I basically got into this work. And I think also my family, I don't have a lot of information about my family. My father's family was quite accomplished, and my mother's family had a lot of tragedy in it. And she could not tolerate hearing my father talk about his family because it reflected to her what she didn't have. So I didn't grow up knowing hardly anything about the legacy I had behind me, which has actually been very inspiring. My great grandmother was the first denominationally ordained minister, woman, female, and she was a suffragette.
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
I didn't learn all of this until I was in my 50s in graduate school, and I mentioned her name at a table, and people said, "Oh, you're related to her?" And I realized I was connected to somebody well known that I knew so little about.
Wow.
So I've become passionate about this work and making sure other people don't have this experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. So tell us too about, and again, it tells us kind of what brought you here around that. And talk a little bit more about the importance of legacy.
Well, when I do bereavement groups, I often find that when people leave things behind for their loved ones, it has a lot of meaning. And one of the things about legacy, I sort of analogize this to ecologists who are often asked this question of where is it best to plant a young tree? And in fact, young trees actually grow better if planted in an area near older trees, where their roots follow the pathways of the older trees and they're better able to implant themselves over time. So over time, the roots graft to one another, creating an interdependent sort of foundation underground where stronger trees share resources with younger ones, and the whole forest is healthier for that phenomenon. So basically, legacy is creating an interconnection across time. And I think of us as having a responsibility to those who come after us, that we need to hear from these people who have gone before us, and we need their lessons and their wisdom. And so legacy writing is a way about sharing our resources with one another.
Yeah, and obviously, in Care Dimensions, we do end of life work, we do support services, palliative care, all of that. And I have been doing this work as a clinical social worker as well for the past 40 years, and I'll tell you, what you're talking about is so crucial to people, and particularly at end of life. It is so important for people, that their story be told.
And it also gives them a huge source of meaning when they're losing so much, that this is one thing they can do and one thing they can be giving to their loved ones. So it's
Yeah.
a valuable source of meaning, I think, for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I don't think people, really, understand the significance of this, and a lot of times until they're kind of right in that situation. So, so I know that, you talk about, like an ethical will.
Yeah. Ethical.
Talk about that. Explain what that is to people, and how is that different from a regular will?
Yeah, so you probably all know that in a regular will, we distribute our material possessions, real estate, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But in an ethical will, and I use the word ethical and spiritual will interchangeably, they're actually synonymous with each other. It's a vehicle through which we transmit meaning, we transmit lessons we've learned and stories, how we've learned those lessons through stories. And it's a way also to sort of gather, preserve, and communicate our values and our wisdom and love for future generations. But its primary concern is to make a contribution to those who are coming after us. One of the things in Rachel Freed's book, which is a book about legacy, she has these notes from grandparents and parents to that are written to grandchildren. They're blessings. Saying, may you always find, for instance, love in whatever work you do. You were such a joy as a child. And some of these little notes are so meaningful to people who who are young and going to be grow up and be our will be grandparents too. But keeping these, for instance, my granddaughter said to me one day, she said, I said, how do you know when you get picked up at nursery school whether or not it's a mother or a grandmother? And she said, oh, it's easy. The mothers look new. And so I write these little notes down to give them back when they're adults. It's a form of legacy, actually about their own life as well as our relationship.
Oh, absolutely. And again, doing, having done so many, really a couple of decades of direct patient care work, what I have, like I said, it's just so important for people to know that their life had significance and meaning.
That's right.
And this is a way of really reflecting on that, isn't it?
Well, I think that part of what makes legacy writing so important is that it really addresses many of the common concerns we all share as we age. Um, so we all share the wish to belong to a family, to belong to a community, maybe a spiritual community, but a larger group than just ourselves. We all share the wish to be remembered and to feel like we were known, to feel like our life actually made a difference to people, and also a way to sort of bless people. I remember when my first book came out and I gave a reading at the Booksmith, and my two daughters came, and at the time they had babies, and there were about 150 people at the Booksmith, and they said to me afterwards, I didn't know you could talk in front of people. Now at, at the moment it seemed funny, but then I thought, there's so much about my life they don't know because I work behind closed doors. And there's a lot about each of our lives that our children and our loved ones don't know. And this becomes a vehicle through which to convey some of those more subtle aspects of our life that people don't know. So, for instance, if I said to my daughter, what are my primary sources of meaning? I think she would know some of them, but she wouldn't know a lot of them. So that this way of doing a life review is a way for us to have a last word about our life and to convey to people what we want them to know about ourselves
Yeah.
and what of value do we want to convey from what we've learned from. Often wisdom comes from suffering. We become wise from suffering. So what are the lessons we learn from various forms of suffering we may have experienced?
Yeah. I just want to say too, because, we were talking about this a couple of minutes ago, but I also want people to understand that this is important also, even if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's and related dementia, this is also something that's very important too, that people's story, they want their story to be told, they want it to be heard. And for people with some form of dementia, their story is still important, very much so. And sometimes then it comes back to us to hold their story. And it's a very important, it's a really an important responsibility, but it's a very precious one. And
Yes,
I
because
think that
they're
because
losing their story
right,
as
right,
they become more demented. So it becomes all the more important for us.
very important. And that's where we come in to continue to hold that story for them because it's still critically important. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so talk more about too, Claire. You mentioned Life Review, and again, I'm a huge fan of Life Review. I think it is such an important tool or resource. Talk more about that and the benefits of doing a Life Review.
Well, the benefits of doing a life review are actually based on some substantial research. So it's considered a common task in the last half of life. People instinctively start to reflect on their life, especially as the horizon gets closer, so to speak. It offers each of us a source of identity at a time of gradual diminishment. Um, it also can reduce feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and despair, which can often accompany aging and more isolation, which a lot of older people feel. It's also a way to make sense of how we lived, and in making sense with how we lived, sharing that with other people. It can strengthen our sense of well-being as we link experiences, looking back, and it leaves a legacy and a gift for those that we love. And it's kind of our last chance to explain, integrate, and reconcile our life experiences. When I work with people doing a life review, I always say to them, um, think of your life in 7-year chunks, because it's much easier to generate memories and stories if you chunk it down into smaller pieces. For instance, I'm almost 80, and if I said, oh, what's my life been like the last 80 years, I go, who knows? But if we say, how were things, what do you remember between 1 and 7 and
Yeah.
7 and 14, it's much easier to bring forth that. And Atul Gawande, in his book Being Mortal, which some of you may have read, says that this dying role, the end of life role, is among life's most important roles. And I love that he says that, because it really gives validity and meaning to this time in our life.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So can you talk more about, what could you talk, like examples of questions that you might include in a life review?
So I might say to people, what were your primary sources of meaning in your life? I might say, what have been some turning points in your life, and what shaped those choices? So whenever I say to a group of people, who remembers Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken? Everybody in the room knows who Robert Frost was and The Road Not Taken, because we've all had these little turning points in our life where we took one road, but there's a little bit of energy that lingers at that juncture where we've often may have wondered what would have been like to take the other road. So that's an interesting and important question. Another might be, what have been the building blocks on which you've built your life, and what have been the stumbling blocks, the critical events? Um, Another one might be, who are some of the most important teachers you've had, and what is it you learned from them that puts them in that category of being so important? One of the writing assignments, or the legacy assignments I often give to people when I'm starting the work, is I'll say to them, make a list of every name you were ever called. Now, when people do that, it brings up memories that you would never have access to at all, if you didn't get that question. So oftentimes the questions we ask generate the memories that we don't have immediate access to, but which we will pull up when we're prompted. So that's some of um, that's some of what I do around legacy work
Yeah, I
for
think
life.
these questions are so important too, Claire, because you really, a part of life review is, celebrating the things that went well and also kind of reworking some of the stuff that didn't,
That's right.
right?
That's right. And one of the things that I do, one of the exercises I do, which in a way falls into life review, I will say to people, make a list of values you feel would be important to convey to your children, your grandchildren, your loved ones. And they'll write things like, get education, find work that you love, be kind. They'll have these little sound bites that fall into general categories. And then I'll say, choose one of those that seems particularly important to you right now. And they'll circle one of them. And then I'll say, why is that so important to you right now? What is the story behind that? Because usually if we feel something's really important, there's a story behind it that has given it that kind of impact in ourselves. And then I'll say to them, what is the story? And what did you learn? Why is, for instance, get educated so important to you? So I invite them to share. Then I say to them, can you convert that instruction, for instance, get educated, to a blessing form, which would be something like, may you find joy in learning, and may you find a way to bring that into the world so that someone doesn't feel like they're being dictated to, but the language of invitation is soft. And so sharing the story of why that's important and then offering somebody a blessing is a beautiful legacy, form of legacy. It's not exactly life review, but in general, it comes into that broad category of life review and can be such a sweet thing to leave behind for people you love.
Yeah. There's some pretty, you can, I think there's some pretty profound questions that you can get to too. I mean, there's some, even just understanding like what was your first pet? What was your, you can ask some basic things like that, or, your first car thing. But when you can also get to these questions where it was, what, things like, how would you like to be remembered? I mean, it's a pretty powerful question, isn't it?
It's a very powerful question
Yeah,
because
go
not
ahead.
everybody's going to know that. And, one of the things that I often do with people I'm working with is I ask them to think about writing something that they would want read at their funeral, which is to your question or your celebration of life. How do you want to be remembered?
Yeah,
Because this is your last chance to have the last word with the people you care about. And oftentimes what I hear is that those words that came from the deceased were the most meaningful words spoken at the funeral.
yeah. And
And
it's
I
interesting.
love the idea of that.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's one of the most really that one of the most profound and important questions that you can ask somebody. And what's interesting to me about that is how or what our view of ourself is not the way what others think of us too. And you learn a lot from that question, don't you?
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. Well, that would be a great question. How do you perceive others seeing you? And how is that in accord or disparate with how you see yourself?
that's a wonderful way to put.
That would
Yeah.
be a great question.
Yeah, I really think it is because again, I think a lot of times they're quite different, aren't they?
That's right. They're quite
Yeah.
different. I mean, I think if you think about how often do you get a compliment and you're slightly incredulous that someone has seen this in you. I mean, that's a common example, right?
Yes, yes, right?
Oh, you look beautiful today. Oh, really? Oh, I just had my hair cut. I don't think I really like
Eh,
it. Or
yeah,
that's a nice blue shirt. Well, I got this at the thrift shop.
yeah,
There's so many ways we don't take in the goodness.
right, yeah. I think
Yeah.
another one of those questions that I often thought about too over the years and doing my work was, wondering from people, if they had something that they wish they had done differently or done over, or what
That's a
they
good
had regret about. Because again, so we assume that we know the person so well when these are getting to a whole different level, when we're asking these questions and people are able to really talk about this.
Well, I think in terms of creating a legacy, if we move a little bit away from life review, I mean, one of the things I often say to people is make a list of everybody to whom you owe a thank you note,
Oh,
that-
nice.
or make a list of people to whom you feel you want to make amends. I never say to whom do you need to be forgiven, because that leaves you at the mercy of the limits of the other person. But I often will say, are there amends that you need to make? And how can we do that through a letter, making sure to say what it is you're apologizing for with a lot of specificity, because that helps people bring closure and peace. And it's a way to be remembered too. It's a beautiful way to be remembered as someone who was grateful, someone who wasn't afraid of saying, I'm sorry, you
Yeah.
know.
And these again are very important points, forgiveness and gratitude and all of those. These are important vehicles really that we need at this, I think throughout all stages of life, but also particularly that they become heightened when people are in the end stage of life.
That's right, because the desire to see it clear before it's over is really strong. You know, the bucket list becomes about coming into right relationship
Yeah.
with everybody you know and loved.
Yeah. And it's just so important to, again, just how that goes. I always say that, this matters so much, the work that we do when you're doing end of life work, and it matters for that individual who's at end of life, the people who love them and surround them. And it also matters to the caregivers. We get a shot at this. We get one shot at this, and I feel that it must go well.
That's right. That's exactly right. We get one shot.
Yeah, and that's why I get, even when my daughter was younger and she was very perplexed by the work that I did. And she was asking me what was my thing around this. And I said, well, my thing is that this is such a precious stage of life that I feel like we have a moral and ethical responsibility to tend to this and for it to go really well.
My daughters don't understand why I do this work either, but they respect it. But they call me the Grim Reaper. But in fact, I actually find that doing this work makes my life more joyful because I really get that my time is limited and I want to use it well.
Yes,
So
yes.
for me, it's not morbid at all. It's actually enhances my gratitude and the quality of my life
I
enormously. I bet you do too. You feel the same way.
Totally agree. This is such a precious stage, and when people invite you to be a part of this, there is no greater honor that will
It's
ever
a
be bestowed.
privilege. Yeah, it's such a
Yeah,
privilege.
yeah.
I couldn't agree
So,
with you more.
I tell you, talk more about. I know that there's other things besides life review that you mentioned that are in an ethical will, things like that. Are there any other areas that you'd like to focus on with that?
Well, I would say making sure that you've conveyed gratitude to people who have helped you or helped you. There's a beautiful quote by Albert Einstein, which probably is a little bit surprising. And I just wanted to see if I could pull it up, but I can't right now. But basically, he talks about, oh, here it is. He says, at times our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each
Wow,
of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame within us.
wow,
And
that's beautiful.
I always say to people, is there somebody from your past that did that doesn't really know how important they were? Write them a letter. And so often there's a lot of research about how when you convey gratitude to somebody, it makes your happiness level increase as well as theirs. So
Yeah,
what a beautiful way to make yourself happy and somebody else at the same time. And it's so simple. I mean, I think that and forgiveness. And I think the other thing that I think is important is how do we maintain hope as we get older, and that sharing what we hope for and having what's called what Kata Weingarten, a psychologist, calls reasonable hope is so important. I had a I had a client once who said she was clearly dying, and her story is so important. She had a 4 and a 6-year-old, and she was clearly going to die. She was in her end stage, and I said, "What do you hope for?" And she said, "Well, nothing I've ever hoped for has ever happened," which
oh,
was so sad. And so I worked with her a little more, and she said, "Well, I hope to live, but I know I'm not going to. But I guess my next hope would be that my children will remember me." And
mm,
what she did was she bought a book for each child for their birthdays till they were 21 and wrote in it why she loved that book, which was her way of letting them know a little bit more about their mother. And
awesome.
and then she gave that to her husband. And so that's what we call reasonable hope. That was a hope that was reasonable. For her to say hope to live wasn't a reasonable hope. So
Right.
helping people find reasonable hope, because there's always something to hope for, and then helping them find pathways towards fulfilling that is really important.
Oh, absolutely.
It's important that we hold Denise Levertov has a beautiful poem called Hope and Love, and she says, hope is the hardest love we carry.
Uh,
And I love that. I love that,
yeah.
the idea of hope as a form of love.
Absolutely. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
I know we only have a couple more minutes, so I want to give you this, this time if there are other things that you want to say. This time goes by. I love talking with you, Claire. And it feels like a minute, in the time that's gone by. But I want you to take this last couple minutes to say anything else that you would like to in terms of wrapping up. And
Well, I guess I want to say that when I do bereavement work, one of the things that's always moving to me is that people who are left things in writing from their loved ones, but those things become treasures, and not something that's typed or an email or anything, but leaving something in your own handwriting for people you love is such a gift. And the people that have that in my bereavement groups become the object of jealousy of people who don't have it. And handwriting things has become obsolete and unfortunate. It's unfortunate because it's such an intimate way of conveying feelings and thoughts to other people. And I would just say, take the time to think about your life and what about your life you can gift and share to other people, and then find a way to write it out and make sure they get it, either while you're alive or after you're gone. But it's really is a treasure.
absolutely. And I think your point as well in that sometimes we wait, right? We have these things that we want to say, and you talked about people that we're grateful for that have really shaped us. Why do we wait? Why do we wait?
Well, and w- yeah, I mean, life can change in a millisecond.
Sure can. It
It
sure can.
can. Yes.
Claire, thank you
Yep.
from the bottom of my heart for being on this show today with me.
Thanks for having me,
Um,
Mary.
and I hope that you'll come back again. I
Thank you.
really do. Again, you just, I feel like my life is enriched for knowing you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ditto. I feel the
Thank,
same.
thank you so much. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to Time is Everything. And I also want to say that Claire's book, Lasting Words, A Guide to Finding Meaning Towards the Close of Life, I highly recommend it. It's really moving, and I love the way that your use of poetry and things too, Claire. It just makes it just so much more impactful. So thank you so much again for being on the show. Thanks for tuning in, and look forward to you tuning in to other Timing and Everything programs.
A lot of people think that hospice is bringing somebody on in the last few days of life, and that may be true in some instances, but we really like to be able to bring people on a little bit early so that they can really benefit from our whole interdisciplinary team.
Hospice really is a support of services that can really help enhance the quality of life for patients and families. And that, again, it helps to give them a little bit more control over a situation that they may not necessarily feel in control of.
We focus on comfort, and we focus on allowing patients to spend the time enjoying their lives, doing the things that they enjoy.
You literally just pick up the phone and call them and they answer. Or if you, even in the middle of the night, I tell families, if you need somebody, you have a question, you're unsure about something, call. You're not bothering anybody. There's always somebody available.
Because we are expert, we know what to do. That this is what we do to help people. If you are going through something there and you need help, we're here to help, and we are very good at it.